So let's examine how to make your own mark. Okay, at the start of the game, you press continue. Then you go to imp. Okay, press OK. You have the choice between selecting a questionnaire or manually assign your skills. And we're going to manually assign it. Okay, now here, that's your character. Face is just, the voice line is pure cosmetic, whether it's a man or woman. And name and nickname also, whatever you want. Okay, so as you can see here, you have 7 attributes and 3 other attributes, which I would call specialist skills. Okay, let's start with health. Notice also that for the first 7 ones, you cannot go below 30. Okay, so health, as you might expect, health is how many hit points you have and how much damage your character can take. Now, when creating a character, there's 2 ways to play this game. The first one is to play optimized, to fine-tune your character stats to a specific playstyle. Or you can do it in a more immersive way, which is you create the character based on a storyline, which had his or her own flaws. So depending whether you like to roleplay or more in some way power game the game, it's up to you. Okay, so if you want to play optimized for health, it depends, especially early in the game when you don't have good body armor, whether the character is a frontline fighter or somebody who is in the second line. Okay, if it's a frontline fighter, you benefit from having high hit points. However, that bonus is negated later in the game. But I wouldn't call it negated, it's more, as you get better body armor, even low HP characters can survive a long time. So maximizing that to the top, I think it's a bit wasteful. So you take whatever you feel like it. Except for extremely low values, which make the game really dangerous. Okay, then agility. As you would expect it, it's amount of AP, free movement, and how stealthy. Which means if you want to sneak up on enemies, get really close, that's an important stat to look out. However, it's not the only stat for stealth. So how much do you take for that? That depends. From a pure combat perspective, if you have a character that moves around a lot, like for example for flanking the enemies, and is highly mobile, as a highly mobile element in your combat force, then you might want a high agility. However, if it's somebody who doesn't move around that much, you can keep it in the midfield. And for example, if you're a machine gunner or sniper, it really doesn't matter to have that much extra action points, because even a sniper with the best scopes, you usually get only 3 to 4 aim extra points. So you only need 3 or 4 extra action points to aim, and the total pool of action points per round is never more than usually 1 well-aimed shot. Okay, so you can keep that in the low or midfield for less mobile characters and really high for flanking characters. Then dexterity. Now dexterity I would call a luck stat, because in the previous 2 Jag games, if you would sneak, sometimes you would step on a twig and it would alert the enemy. And that was governed by dexterity, I think, in the game code. And I think it's the same in this game. It basically affects various other things in the game. Like here, it actually says it out loud in some ways. Aiming and stealth kill chance. Okay? And I think it also, under the hood, affects other things. So if you need a highly stealthy character, where it really relies on making sure that stealth sneak attack is successful. Like, for example, you have 20 enemies on a map, and you're sneaking up on one of them, and you really want to make sure to take him out without anybody noticing. Then you might want to have a high dexterity stat. Now, strength. Now, strength is an odd stat. There's a certain versatility to it. Okay, so as it says, important melee combat, which means you do more damage in melee, unarmed melee especially. Throwing range, which I think is irrelevant, because mid to late game you will rarely ever throw knives at the enemy. Except, well, grenade throwing is useful. And the size of the personal inventory of the character. Now, if you have a high strength character, it's great for a machine gunner, because he has to carry his own weight and the extra ammo, or somebody who is the ammo bearer for the rest of the squad, especially for machine gunners. So if you have a large inventory, you can carry more inventory and more ammo with it. But then again, the inventory system is sort of, well, it's a bit more primitive than previous Jag games. Okay, now, leadership. Leadership is mostly how quickly you train militias. And positive and negative morale events. Now, what I like for my personal character usually is somebody with a high leadership skill, maxed out, because he's going to be the second line guy that's usually out of combat, And on a strategic map, he's basically staying away from the main combat force in his own squad and training up militias at choke points where the enemy likes to attack. And as for positive and negative morale elements, well, in my view, it doesn't matter that much, because most of the time late in the game, if you really want to win the game fast, you get 2 machine gunners, lots of ammo for them, and it's like throwing enemies into the wood chipper. So I never paid much attention to morale events in the game. However, it might be more important for you if you play a different playstyle. Okay, wisdom is basically how quickly you level up your stats. And wilderness survival. Now that's useful for if you do recon, because in this game, for some weird reason, about 50% of the time, if I do, or even 70% of the time, if I do recon, I usually have to trade my health points for recon, because I usually get mauled by wild animals as a random event. And I think that might negate it a bit. So, but then again, as I said earlier, late game, I don't care much for intel, and notice hidden items and enemies. That's almost irrelevant in this game, because you will notice items anyway if you walk close up to them. And looting isn't that big of a part of a game. And hidden enemies, well, it really doesn't matter that much, because maps are actually quite small. For example, some of the city maps are bigger, but the regular random terrain maps, some of them are like much smaller. So you will rarely get a situation where you just do not notice an enemy. Now, marksmanship, I think it's the most, I wouldn't say important, but the most game affecting skill. So for example, when I first played through on the hardest difficulty, I had a character at 58 marksmanship. And about 50% of the shots I would miss at normal distances with normal weapons. And I would even miss sometimes firing bursts from a submachine gun at an enemy standing right next to me while aiming at the head. However, a character with 80 marksmanship, or 78, like Igor at the start of the game, would be able to hit, with a rifle with a scope, would hit 80% of headshots at the outside of the edge of the maximum range. So it's going to be a pretty big difference from 60 to 80 marksmanship, because 80 marksmanship is, you can hit anything you want most of the time. 70 is an average shooter. 60, you will spend a lot of time cursing at the game because you miss your shots. Okay, now come to 3 specialist skills. Usually what I like to do when I played even Jag 2 back then and Jag 1, oh wait, in Jag 1 you couldn't actually make your own character, is that I pick one of those and leave the others at 0. So for example, if you have mechanical at a high level, now mechanical is a skill that most NPCs you can hire have in small quantities, like 10, 20, 30 sometimes. So if you just sometimes need to repair a gun, it's good enough. However, sometimes you want to have a character that's maxed out on it. So he's your primary guy to fix guns in combat, and he can hack and open locks and all of that. But it's not that important of a skill, because that's the type of skill you have in a squad in certain small amounts, and it's good enough to repair guns. Now, explosives is an interesting skill. I haven't found a situation yet where I really needed a high maxed out explosives character. However, what I really regretted early in the game is having characters with almost or very little no explosive skill, because a character with 5 to 10 explosive skill will mess up most of his grenade throws, which will show a mishap, and then the grenade will end up in the wrong place. And the same for RPG 7s if you shoot them. So if you plan to throw any grenades, at least have that at 20, 30. And if you plan to not throw any grenades, you can leave that at 0. And the final one is medical. Now, medical is, again, depending how you want to play it. For example, if you want to have a character that's a second line guy who doesn't do much fighting, but he's the main doctor of the team, then it's actually a good benefit to have a high medical skill. Because the cool thing is about your own character, you only pay once, I think, $7,001. And you never have to pay for the character monthly or weekly again. And having a doctor that never costs you money, because you always need to heal wounds, that's a pretty good thing to have.